Hello, could
Hello.
you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Dainis and I am working living in Riga, and my workplace is Latvian War Museum.
In a few days, there will be the 20th anniversary of the entrance of Latvia in the European Union and the North Atlantic Treaty of Organization. What are the analysis and assessments you have on the situation?
Actually, this decision was the best one which was made during last 20 years, because this decision make guarantees for Latvia to live in peace. And actually, at that time, I voted for these decisions and supported them.
How is Latvia politically and militarily reacting to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict?
This conflict directly hurts our feelings, because we experienced Russian Empire and Soviet Union, and this attack carried out by Russians against smaller countries, smaller former part of the Soviet Union, raised quite a big alarm among ethnic Latvians, because we experienced many bad events previously from Russian hands. And we look on history, especially on Second World War history, a little bit different as other Europeans. Because for us, Second World War was over just in 1990, when Soviet Union collapsed.
Just another question. Do you think it represents a real threat today for Latvia, actually?
It represents a real threat not just for Latvia, but for whole Baltic region and Eastern Europe in general. It's in some form situation and feelings and emotions are like during 1930s, shortly before outbreak of Second World War, when aggressive neighbors attacked smaller countries and nobody cared. And actually, because I'm historian, for me these last 10 years were quite complicated, because I had clear feelings that we are going towards big war in Europe and nobody cares. We need a big business or big income from oil and gas on big Russian market, and nobody cared very much what is going really in Eastern Europe. So that's the difference how we feel this war here. It's my personal opinion, but many people share these feelings. And Latvians actually supported Ukraine as a society. It's not just a decision by politicians, but actually people, volunteer movement donated cars, trucks, medicine. Actually, society supports Ukraine, because we know each day when Ukrainians defending their country, that means one more peaceful day here in Latvia. That's the reality.
Sorry. Excuse-moi, j'ai juste deux, trois questions. What about, I know that there is some Russian-born who lives in Latvia. If I'm correct, there is what, 30% of the population?
Actually, in Latvia are living almost 70 to 80 nationalities from Soviet Union, and it's big mistake to call all them Russians, because Russians are large minority, and they want to represent all other minority groups here in Latvia. But actually here are living Ukrainians, Belarusians, Jews, Armenians, and many other nations from former Soviet Union. And actually not everybody is concentrated on this conflict. Latvians, Russians, West, East. Many people had their own identities, and they didn't want to become Russians at all. as well. We have Russian-speaking people who are completely against Putin's regime, and as well we have Latvians who are pro-Putin. So it's more complicated.
So it's mixed. We
It's
have
mixed.
Opinion.
It's more complicated. It's in history. It's never just black, white, red, or brown. It's a mixture of colors, feelings, and it depends from background of people. And why ethnic Latvians are not so supportive for Kremlin. It's heritage from history because our ancestors were sent to Siberia, died from starvation, were mobilized in the Soviet Red Army and died in wars completely irrelevant for Latvian civilian population. We don't need Afghanistan, but Latvians were forced to fight this war launched by Soviets. So we have clear answer why we don't want Kremlin here as a ethnic Latvian. And it's simply a question of morals. Can you support simple, how to say, thieves or robbery or violent crime against smaller neighbor just because you want to restore one old time ago extinct empire?
Yeah, it's a question of invasion. So invasion of
Actually, I can ask a simple question for any Russian. You failed twice. You had every powers in your hands. You failed in 1917. You failed in 1919. Why you think this old historical corpse survive in modern days? It's as old proverb, you can't step in the same water in the river. It's different time. And we see from many events that modern Russian government wants to steer back Russia in these old bad days. And people who understands history, who knows history of Europe, clearly sees these threats and problems. It's not just pro-Russian or against Russian. It's Russians here actually very little question. It's more about it's freedom or dictatorship. It's just political propaganda trick invented by Moscow to show this conflict as pro-Russian or anti-Russian. Russians are very minimal in this problem. In my opinion, it's actually artificially created question. It's more, do you want leadership that sits in one place 24 years? Or you want to freely travel? Or you want to die in the army in some strange place in war? We want to be free. To speak in Latvian. Ukrainians wanted the same. Actually, they were attacked because they wanted freedom. Russian dictatorship understood if Ukraine moves away as a national statehood, obtains freedom, market economy, they developed quite good economy. When they kicked away these corrupt authorities, they worked quite well as society. And Kremlin became extremely afraid from this. If Ukraine succeeds, Russians start ask questions. Why is the richest country? Why we are so poor? Russia is phenomenal country, unbelievably rich country. But general population is absolutely poor. We seen before war, I meet with a lot of Russian tourists and we had visitors from former Soviet Union and Russian Federation, and they ask question how you obtained all these cars, trucks, homes. Do you have oil? No. Do you have gold? No. We just work and use resources what we have. How you can make state budget? We just work. we are using. We don't need to capture other countries and to invade somebody to be happy. And that's the difference how we see world in a normal European country and how on board looks Kremlin or his followers. And they have money, they can buy opinions, they can buy mass media, and people can make big profit in Russia. It's of course quite important tool in hands of Kremlin. Oil, gas, income, big market. It's lucrative from some people. If you kick aside moral questions, it's not a big problem for them to make business with Mr. Putin because it's profitable. It's very simple.
Okay.
So, how is Latvia dealing with its two types of borders, the Schengen one and the Russian one, surrounding the country?
Border with Russia is quite interesting one. I last time crossed it back in 1992. I had a Latvian passport, a new passport, and Russian border guard see my document, and he became quite angry. And it was not very pleasant experience. And Moscow in 1992. And I never had the feeling and wish to go to cross this border again. We ran away from Soviet Union, and I wanted to be as far as possible from everything what was related to the Soviet Union or Russian Federation or Russian Empire, as far as possible. And towards west, actually, these borders opened very slowly. And when we joined in this Schengen zone, Latvians were quite happy. And now we are enjoying freedom of travel. And Latvian passport is quite powerful. We can freely visit many countries. And but it's of course depends from your background. For some people, especially Russian-speaking people, Russian side is still important. They didn't cut their ties with Russia. So it's again mixed bag.
And how is the border with Russia today? Is it closed or is it open? Or is it the
It's
state right now?
partly closed, partly open. It depends. Some goods are moving despite sanctions. Actually, Russia is not completely closed from Western world. But it helps for them to continue war because money gives power to armies. If government loses money, they lose this power to conduct a war. And unfortunately, we are little bit too reluctant to restrict some comfortable things. We want cheap oil, cheap natural gas, and Russia still can modernize and use their weapons in Ukraine. It's quite strange. We have device in museum, Russian drone shot down in Ukraine, and it's full with parts made in the West. So politics and these wars are extremely complicated. From one side, West and we are supporting Ukraine, but from other side, we don't use all war capabilities to stop Russian aggression. And other dictatorships are carefully watching what is going on in Ukraine. And they had captured the moments that society, international community was quite quiet about events in 2014, and other dictatorships are becoming more brave. Russians captured Crimea, they almost walked away intact, and others started to follow Russian. We will have, if Russians walk away without punishment from Ukraine, then other dictatorships repeat in many other places. This will run out of control like in 1930s. it's much more dangerous, this war, for outside world, as many other people, ordinary people didn't understand how dangerous this war is actually for law and order in the whole world. It's not just about Ukraine or Baltics or NATO. Stakes are much more higher, much more higher.
Okay. And do you feel, as Latvians, being in European Union, do you feel safer, or does it not change everything for you?
European Union is busy with business, and from safety point of view, we don't feel safety provided by EU, because EU is mostly like club of business people, of politicians. It's not military organization, and we have feelings that if you want peace, you need real military force here in this region right now. And not just political declarations that we are concerned and that we are worried. If you want something to show for Russians, you need real force. It's like story from my childhood when I was born and lived actually in area completely inhabited by Latvians. In late 1960s, early 1970s, Russians started to import a lot of workers from Soviet Union, mainly Russians. And when they arrived, they called us fascists Latvians. I didn't know Russian language when I was 6-7 years old. I was already called fascist. I asked for my father what it is fascist. And then he said, last fascists in Riga were in 1943 when Italians were kicked out from Hotel de Rome. Since this time, nobody sees real fascists here in Riga. And I obtained experience. If you fight back, if you punch by force, you are safe after that. If you surrender, you are harassed all the time. I went from school. I had fist fights with no Russian neighbors. I fight back, and I was safe because I showed that I will fight back. Somebody surrendered, and they always paid these 10 kopecks when they came out from school. And that was lesson obtained when I was 7 years old. If you are living with Russians, you need to demonstrate your force, capability to fight, to convince. I learned Russian language not from fairy tales or from nice words. I learned it from street talk. Very, very rude words. And when you speak in such way, they understood you. They respect you. If you are polite, you are weak. And that was experience from my childhood. And they are acting like this in state higher level. You think that if you are polite, then they will respect. No, it's just opposite. I had meeting with head of Russian election commission here in the War Museum, and he was quite. It's actually member of the Zhirinovsky party, Liberal Democrats, and he was quite aggressive. And when I showed my position, he became quiet. He understood that his aggression didn't work. Only then you can speak with Russians, when you show power. Not noisy power, but real power. Not words, but real force.
Okay.
That's different.
Okay.
That's different, absolutely different mentality.
Okay. Last question, maybe about Ukrainians. You have, I learned that you have refugees a lot of refugees in Latvia.
Yeah.
Do you
Some
know?
refugees are working in the War Museum as janitors, and we meet them here.
And do you have some numbers? Do you know approximately how much?
I know just public numbers, publicly published in media, some 32,000 people approximately could be right now. But this number is quite different because some Ukrainians are going back, some are coming again, and Ukrainians are choosing Latvia because we know Russian language, more or less, and for them it's more easily to adapt, and some people have relatives. Actually, Ukrainian minority was quite large here, even before war. Ukrainians were dispersed around the Soviet Union like Latvians because Soviets tried to mix ethnic minorities to make this Soviet Union more to homogeneous. They see each minority as threat.
And is there a good relationship between two countries, you think? Generally,
With Ukraine, we always, as during independence period, with Ukraine, we had quite good relations all the time, no problems. We don't have much to clash about. And Latvians right now seeing this Ukraine because we experienced these post-world wars, we experienced all Stalinist, communist and Nazi repressions, we understood quite well what it means to be a country bombed by modern advanced weapons. And some things are absolutely... When you speak with these refugees who are bombed out from their homes, with kids who are terrified in a rural area, in first summer I was in my rural home, and there were kids also from Ukraine, and jet fly overhead, and kids were so scared that they tried to hide because nobody warns that NATO fighter jet. We simply didn't understood that these kids were terrified. We simply forget to speak that NATO makes military exercise and fighter jets will fly above your head and it's nothing to worry. But kids were simply terrified because they experienced bombing raids from Russian Sukhoi 35 fighter bombers. And it's several months after the war, they were still terrified from fighter jet sounds. When you see this in real life, it changes your feelings about this war. You understand that it's not on TV screen, it's real war, real people, and it's in Europe. About this war, the most shocking event actually was a little bit before this phase of the war in 2015. We had information about tank battles in Ukraine. And CNN, BBC, all larger news agencies kept silence for 2 weeks, not a single word. We had already refugees, we had from social media, tank battles in streets like from Second World War, and silence in the West, absolute. Only when somebody published Uragan and Smerch missiles on Balkany on civilians, only then some news started to come out. Oh, something like war is going on in Ukraine. What we will do? And it was the most shocking event, how blind modern world, how blind mass media were at that time at the beginning of this war. Actually, it's going on since 2014. And Russian army was in Ukraine, and simply there were journalists who wrote, oh, no, we have business, Ukrainians should give up, no aggression here. It's some Russian craftsmen and workers somewhere mysteriously found weapons and they are fighting against Ukraine. But we know these drones were already in 2015.
Okay.
Even when this plane was shut down, it was almost like online. I was on holiday, I watched these war events. I actually almost online, and Russians announced we shot down Ukrainian plane. We achieved victory, and then this suddenly came out from Russian social media. Oops, civilian closing. Probably we hit something else. And then immediately came out that it is foreign passenger plane shot down. And then it was interesting to see how from social media disappears all the Russian filmed news reels, and next day, no, it's Ukrainian shot down. Actually, in first hours, every Russian speaking social media was happy. We are so great, we shot down Ukrainian plane, and we achieved victory. When they understood that mistake happened, and they are guilty. This story of war is simply amazing, shockingly amazing, in very bad way, how blind outside world was to the situation in the East. So about West we have mixed feelings. From one side we have peace, we have allies, but from other side we have feelings that how slow, how reluctant Western allies is to open eyes what is going on in Ukraine. And if Ukrainian war ends in Russian victory, West will have problems with Taiwan, with Philippines, with South China Sea, with Persian Gulf, in many other places. It will grow like a disaster, like a snowfall.
Okay.